I will never forget the sight of those chairs. My wedding day in Charleston, South Carolina should have been a picture of joy. The morning air carried the sweet smell of magnolia blossoms, and the city seemed to shimmer in that golden haze that makes everything feel timeless. The church had been decorated exactly as Anna and I had planned. White roses draped along the pews, tall candles glowing at the altar, and a quartet softly rehearsing a string melody that made my chest swell with hope. I had pictured this moment for years, walking down that aisle, turning to see Anna in her gown, and feeling surrounded by family as our vows were sealed. But when I turned toward the rows reserved for my family, my heart sank. Those seats were bare, every one of them, like open wounds. I saw the neat little cards with names written in careful calligraphy. My mother, my father, my brother Daniel, even my oldest friends Michael and Sarah, but not a single one of them was there. The emptiness was louder than any whisper, sharper than any word. For a few seconds, I convinced myself they might be late. I told myself maybe my parents' car had broken down, or my brother had forgotten his tie and rushed back to the hotel. Maybe my friends had gotten caught in traffic. I wanted so badly to believe it was something small, something forgivable. But as the minutes ticked past, as Anna's father squeezed my shoulder in quiet reassurance, I knew the truth. They were not coming. The service began anyway. The doors opened and Anna appeared, radiant in a dress of ivory lace that shimmered as though it carried its own light. The guests who had chosen to come, her family, her friends, a few colleagues of mine, rose to their feet with admiration. I smiled at her truly and deeply, but behind that smile lived a wound I could not cover. Each step she took toward me should have been a step toward wholeness. Yet all I could see was the hollow space where my own blood should have stood. When we exchanged vows, my voice trembled, not out of fear of commitment, but because I had never felt so abandoned. I promised to love Anna in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow, and I meant every word, but deep down, part of me grieved. The family I had defended for years, the people I had sacrificed for, had chosen not to see the most important moment of my life. It wasn't until later that evening, after the reception had wound down and the laughter of Anna's cousins still echoed faintly in the hall, that I learned where they had gone. My sister Claire had held her engagement party that very same day. The timing had never been a mistake. It had been a deliberate choice. They had all gone to her. My parents, my brother, even my childhood friends who had once sworn they'd be by my side no matter what. They had filled her ballroom while leaving my church in silence. The pain hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just about missing the ceremony. It was about everything that choice represented. For years I had seen the favoritism. Claire had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When she wanted a car for her 17th birthday, my parents bought her a brand new BMW for nearly $40,000. When I graduated from college with honors, they mailed me a check for $200 and a note that said, "We're proud of you, son." When Claire got a job in New York, they threw her a $25,000 farewell party at the Ritz-Carlton. When I started my own construction business in Atlanta, they told me to be practical and asked if I had thought about finding a steady office job instead. That night, sitting in the honeymoon suite with Anna asleep beside me, I stared out at the Charleston skyline and felt a storm inside me. I had never asked for much. I had worked, struggled, and built something for myself. I had tried to be a son they could respect, a dependable brother, a man who carried his own weight. Yet when it came to the day that mattered most, they had made their priorities clear. They had chosen her. They had always chosen her. The memory of those empty seats haunted me in the days that followed. I kept replaying the sight in my mind. The neat rows, the empty spaces, the mocking quiet. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I hadn't tried hard enough. Perhaps I had failed to earn their love. But the more I thought, the more I realized this wasn't about me at all. It was about them. About their obsession with appearances, with Claire's sparkle, with the image they wanted to project. My wedding hadn't been about them, so they had decided it wasn't worth their time. I cannot put into words how lonely I felt. Not just in the church, but in the weeks after, when Anna and I returned to our modest home in Atlanta. Calls from my parents went unanswered. Daniel sent me a text that simply said, "It was Claire's big day too, you know." As if two lives could not matter at once. As if my vows were nothing compared to her diamond ring. But through the ache, something else began to grow. A resolve I hadn't known I carried. That day had stripped me of illusions. The family I thought I had was gone, or maybe it had never been there at all. I could no longer fool myself into believing I was part of them in any equal way. And while the pain still burned, beneath it lay a spark, an ember of strength I had never needed more than now. I promised myself that night that I would not let their absence define me. I would not spend my life begging for scraps of their approval. Anna and I had love, we had each other, and I could build a life far stronger than the fragile image my family clung to. That vow, whispered in the dark while Anna slept peacefully beside me, became the quiet foundation of everything that came after. And yet, even as I hardened my heart, one image lingered, the sapphire necklace my grandmother had once promised would be mine, the one she said I should give to my bride on her wedding day. It had not been given to me. Deep down, I already suspected where it had gone. And that truth, when it finally came to light, would reopen every wound that those empty chairs had left behind. If the empty chairs at my wedding had been a blade through my chest, what came afterward was the twist of that blade. In the days following the ceremony, I tried to bury my hurt beneath the sweetness of the honeymoon. Anna and I had spent a week in Savannah, walking along the cobblestone streets, eating dinner at riverfront cafes, and pretending, just for a little while, that family betrayal hadn't stained the start of our marriage. She deserved that peace, and I wanted to give it to her. But even there, in the quiet of our rented townhouse with the sound of the river just beyond the balcony, the ache followed me. It was a phone call from my Aunt Margaret that stripped away whatever fragile calm I had clung to. She spoke in a hushed voice as though saying the words too loud would curse her. "Did you know Claire wore the sapphire necklace to her engagement party?" My heart stilled. She didn't need to say more. I knew exactly which necklace she meant. That necklace had belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor. It was no ordinary jewel. Deep blue stones encircled with diamonds, handed down through 3 generations of our family. My grandmother had always said it was meant for me, to give to my bride on the day I married. I remembered the first time she placed it in my hands. I must have been 16, awkward and unsure of my place in the world, but she smiled and told me, "One day, this will go to the woman you love. It will remind you of where you came from, but also of the future you're building." She had written it in her will even, making sure there would be no confusion. That necklace, appraised at nearly $150,000, wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a promise, a legacy, and a gift meant to anchor me in a family that had so often made me feel disposable. Knowing it had been quietly slipped onto Claire's neck while Anna stood at the altar without it, it was like losing my grandmother all over again. I confronted my parents the very next day. I drove from Atlanta to their house in Charleston, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles ached. When my father opened the door, his face was a mixture of annoyance and indifference, as if he'd been expecting me but had already decided my words would mean nothing. "It was promised to me," I said before I even sat down. My mother, sipping her tea in the sunroom, didn't flinch. My father gave a tired sigh, as though I were a child demanding candy instead of a man asking for what was rightfully his. "Your sister's wedding is going to be much larger," he said. "There will be investors from Europe, friends from New York, people we cannot afford to disappoint. The necklace is better in her hands. It will be seen," the words hit me like stones. Better in her hands. As though I had never been worthy of it. As though my marriage wasn't important enough to deserve honor. I argued, I pleaded, but my mother only shook her head. "You're making this about yourself again. Don't you see we have to think about the family's image?" Anna's name never even crossed their lips. My bride, who had stood proudly at my side, who had weathered every insult and silence, was invisible to them. They had stolen from her as much as from me. I left that house with rage boiling in my veins. For days I could not eat, could not sleep. The betrayal seeped into everything. Even my friends, Michael and Sarah, who had been invited to both my wedding and Claire's engagement, whispered behind my back. One evening, I overheard them telling others at a dinner party that I had refused the necklace because I didn't want to be burdened with family heirlooms. A lie so absurd it almost made me laugh. Almost. I realized then that this was not just favoritism. It was collusion. They weren't content to sideline me. They wanted to erase me, to paint me as someone unworthy, unreliable, undeserving. And Claire, always so polished and smiling, stood at the center of it, accepting the necklace with grace as if it had always been hers to take. But instead of breaking, I hardened. Grief turned into resolve. I began gathering proof, not just for myself, but for the day when truth would matter more than their illusions. I went back to my grandmother's lawyer and requested copies of the will. There it was in black ink. To my grandson, I leave the sapphire necklace, to be presented to his bride on his wedding day. Signed, notarized, irrefutable. I tracked down the jeweler in Boston who had been hired to reset one of the diamonds a month before Claire's party. He gave me the receipt, signed by her. I collected photographs from social media, images of her laughing at rooftop parties, the necklace glittering against her collarbone while strangers toasted her with champagne. Every piece was a nail in the coffin of their lies. At night, in the quiet of our Atlanta home, I spread the papers across my desk. Bank records, legal documents, photographs, each one a shard of truth. Anna would sometimes find me staring at them for hours. She never pushed me, never told me to let it go. She would just lay her hand on my shoulder and remind me gently, "We're building something stronger than this. Don't let them take your joy." Her words anchored me, but I knew deep down this wasn't over. This wasn't just about a necklace. It was about years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as second best. It was about every time my achievements were brushed aside while Claire's smallest successes were paraded like parables. It was about truth. I told myself I wasn't planning revenge. I was simply protecting the legacy that had been entrusted to me, safeguarding my grandmother's wish. But part of me, the part that still ached with the memory of empty seats, longed for the day when their lies could no longer be hidden behind polite smiles and polished appearances. And so, quietly, I waited. I built my files, my proof, my case. I let them laugh, let them whisper, let them believe they had won. Because one day, when the chandeliers blazed above Claire's wedding, when the eyes of Europe and America turned to watch her shine, the truth would shatter everything. That necklace was mine. And more importantly, the promise it carried was mine. They had stolen it, but I would not let them keep it. For months after the betrayal, I did not speak of it. Not to my parents, not to my brother, not to Claire, and certainly not to the so-called friends who had laughed at my absence of fortune while pretending to toast her success. I let them believe I was broken or perhaps resigned. I let them whisper that I had been foolish to expect anything more. In truth, I was gathering my strength in silence. Work became my salvation. My construction firm in Atlanta had started as little more than a two-man operation. I remember those early days vividly, sitting in a rented office space above a tire shop, drafting blueprints on a shaky wooden desk while rainwater leaked through the ceiling tiles. But I had a vision that was larger than my circumstances. I took on jobs others considered too small or too messy. Remodeling basements, repairing storm-damaged roofs, and converting old textile warehouses into loft apartments. I treated every project as though it were the foundation of something grander. The more I poured myself into my work, the more it grew. Within 2 years, I had tripled my staff. By 30, I had contracts with developers across Georgia, and my firm had been valued at over $12 million. Some days, I would stand outside a building my company had just completed, gleaming glass towers or sprawling residential complexes, and think to myself, this is mine. Not a gift, not an inheritance, but mine. Through it all, Anna was by my side. She never wavered. While my family dismissed my ambitions as reckless, she believed in me with a steadiness that felt unshakable. When nights stretched long into the early morning hours, with paperwork scattered across the dining table and coffee gone cold, she would sit quietly beside me, her presence grounding me. Sometimes she would read aloud passages from her favorite novels, her voice weaving calm into my restless mind. Other times, she simply placed her hand over mine and reminded me that what we were building was not just a business, but a life. It was during those years that we found the house in Asheville, North Carolina. A lakefront property, old but full of character, with wide porches and oak trees that seemed older than time itself. The house needed work. Its roof sagged, the floors creaked. The windows rattled at every gust of wind. But when I walked through the front door, I felt something I had never felt in my parents' grand Charleston estate, peace. We bought it for $1.2 million, pouring another $600,000 into renovations. When the work was complete, the house stood as both sanctuary and symbol. It was proof that we could create warmth and permanence without the approval of anyone else. Within its walls, I began keeping my records. At first, it was just a slim folder tucked away in the drawer of my study desk, copies of my grandmother's will, receipts from the Boston jeweler, a few photographs of Claire wearing the necklace at parties. But over time, that folder grew into boxes. bank statements that showed money shifted to cover Claire's whims, notarized letters that contradicted the lies my parents told, emails forwarded quietly by relatives who still had a conscience. Every piece of paper was a fragment of truth. I stored them carefully in the attic, labeling each box with the precision of an archivist. Anna asked me once if it was worth holding on to all that pain. I looked at her and said, "It isn't pain I'm storing, it's proof. Proof that one day, when they claim innocence, I'll have more than my word to stand on." She didn't argue. She simply nodded because she understood what silence can carry. Life outside of family drama flourished. My company expanded beyond Georgia into Tennessee and the Carolinas. I signed contracts worth tens of millions, sat across polished boardroom tables from men twice my age, and for the first time, I saw respect in the eyes of those who had once dismissed me. There was power in knowing I had built all of it without the help of the people who should have been my first supporters. And yet, even in success, the shadows of betrayal lingered. At industry galas or community events, I sometimes crossed paths with acquaintances who had been at Claire's side the day of her engagement party. They would smile, shake my hand, and pretend nothing had happened. I learned to mirror their politeness, but inside I remembered every smirk, every whispered rumor, every empty chair at my wedding. What surprised me most was how my silence unsettled them. When I didn't lash out, when I didn't beg for acknowledgement or forgiveness, it made them uneasy. Claire especially seemed rattled by my quiet. Once, at a fundraiser in Boston, she approached me in her glittering gown, the sapphire necklace gleaming at her throat. She leaned close and whispered, "You should really let go of the past, Elias. It doesn't suit you to hold grudges." I only smiled. I didn't need to argue. Her words told me everything. She knew I hadn't forgotten, so I waited. I invested in patience the way others invested in stocks and bonds. While they flaunted their wealth and influence, I poured mine into foundations more enduring. I donated to hospitals, sponsored scholarships for engineering students, and funded community housing projects. My name began appearing in local newspapers, not as a footnote to Claire's glittering life, but as a headline of my own. And every article clipped, every photograph saved, went into the boxes alongside the evidence. Because success itself was part of the proof. At night, when the house was quiet and the lake shimmered under the moonlight, I would walk up to the attic and look at those boxes. They were heavy, not just with paper, but with years of silence, waiting for the right moment. Some nights I imagined what it would feel like to open them in front of everyone, to lay out the truth so starkly that no smile, no excuse, no manipulation could cover it. I wasn't seeking revenge. At least that's what I told myself. What I wanted was balance, acknowledgement, the restoration of what had been stolen. My grandmother's promise, Anna's dignity, my own place in a family that had cast me aside. They believed their power was untouchable, that their lies were unshakable. But I knew something they didn't. Truth, when held long enough in silence, grows sharper with time. And so I built. I built my company, my home, my marriage, and my case. Every wall we painted in Asheville, every contract I signed in Atlanta, every document I stored in the attic, it was all part of the same foundation. Not revenge, not yet, but preparation, because I knew deep in my bones that the day would come when silence would no longer protect them. And when that day arrived, every chair in the room would be filled, not with absence, but with undeniable truth. The night of Claire's wedding in New York City is seared into my memory with a clarity that feels almost cinematic. The Plaza Hotel glittered like a palace, every chandelier dripping with light, every corridor lined with imported flowers that carried a scent both intoxicating and suffocating. Guests had flown in from across America and Europe. Politicians, investors, celebrities, each dressed to impress, their jewels flashing beneath the golden lights. It was meant to be a night of triumph for my sister, a crowning moment for the family who had always paraded her as their jewel. Anna and I arrived quietly, not seeking attention. She wore a midnight blue gown that shimmered as she moved, more beautiful than anyone in that ballroom, though she would never claim it. I wore a simple black suit, tailored but understated, and carried with me something far more powerful than appearances: the boxes of proof I had been building for years. Tucked neatly into a leather portfolio, the documents lay waiting like silent witnesses. I could feel the tension the moment we entered. Conversations faltered. Eyes flicked toward us with thinly veiled curiosity. My parents stood near the head table, radiant in their roles as hosts, but their smiles faltered when they saw me. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's hand fluttered to her pearls. Claire, radiant in a gown that surely cost more than some houses, looked at me with a mix of irritation and unease. Around her neck, of course, gleamed the sapphire necklace. My grandmother's necklace. My necklace. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. I barely heard the vows or the music, barely noticed the applause when the couple kissed. My heart pounded not with nerves, but with anticipation. I knew the moment was coming. The reception stretched long into the evening, course after course of delicacies, champagne poured endlessly, laughter that felt rehearsed. Then, as tradition demanded, the toasts began. I waited, letting others speak first. Friends from college, colleagues of her husband, relatives who praised Claire's charm and beauty as if reciting lines from a script. Finally, my father rose, glass in hand, and delivered a speech about legacy, about family honor, about how proud he was of the daughter who had always carried their hopes. The applause was thunderous, and then silence fell as the microphone was passed to me. I rose slowly, deliberately, my hands steady. I felt Anna's gaze on me, strong and unwavering. I looked across the ballroom at the rows of faces, smiling, expectant, some wary. I took a breath and began. I was told this is a night to celebrate truth, love, and family. But what is family if not honesty? What is love if not respect? And what is truth if it is silenced? A ripple passed through the room. My parents shifted uneasily. Claire's smile froze. I reached into my portfolio and drew out the first document, the copy of my grandmother's will. I held it up, the signature and notarization plain for all to see. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, promised her sapphire necklace to me, to be given to my bride on my wedding day. You can see it written here in her own hand, notarized and filed with her attorney. Murmurs filled the hall. I unfolded photographs next. Images of Claire at her engagement party, the necklace glittering at her throat. Another photo of her in Boston, laughing with friends, the jewel catching the light. I placed them on the table in front of me where everyone could see. The necklace you see tonight on my sister was stolen. Not misplaced. Not given in good faith. Stolen. Taken from a legacy meant for my wife Anna and handed to someone else because favoritism mattered more than truth. Gasps echoed. I pressed on. I laid out receipts from the Boston jeweler, signed by Claire. Bank transfers show funds shifted to cover her extravagant parties. Letters from relatives who had confirmed the will. Piece by piece, the portfolio unfolded into a story that could not be denied. My voice never shook. They told me it was better in her hands, that my marriage did not matter. They told me family image meant more than family truth. Tonight, I stand here not to ruin this celebration, but to reclaim what was always mine, what was promised to me by the only member of this family who ever treated me with fairness. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear the clinking of a glass set down too quickly, the faint hum of the chandeliers above. My parents sat frozen, faces pale. Claire's groom shifted uncomfortably, his smile gone. And Claire herself, she tried to laugh, a brittle, hollow sound. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, but her voice wavered. It was then that Anna stood, her eyes blazing, though her voice was calm. This necklace was meant to honor our marriage, our union. Instead, it was used to humiliate us, to erase us. But truth does not disappear just because someone hides it. Tonight, it has come home. The guests erupted into whispers, shock rolling like a wave through the hall. A few of Claire's friends tried to defend her, but the evidence lay in plain sight, undeniable. No one could dismiss it now. My parents, the architects of so many lies, could only sit in the ruin of their silence. By the end of the night, the necklace was returned to me. Not ceremoniously, not graciously, but because there was no longer a way to deny it. It was placed into my hand, heavy and cold, a symbol of both loss and vindication. I did not gloat, did not smile. I simply turned to Anna, fastened it around her neck, and whispered, "This is where it was always meant to be." We did not stay to savor their shame. After the necklace was restored, Anna and I left the ballroom, hand in hand. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city lights stretching endlessly across Manhattan. I felt lighter than I had in years, as though the burden of silence had finally lifted. Behind us, I knew their carefully crafted image lay shattered, broken under the weight of truth. I never looked back. That night was the end of something, an ending not of loss, but of liberation. I closed the door on a family who had chosen deceit, and I chose instead the life Anna and I had built with our own hands. Peace, love, and a future on my own terms. Their silence had wounded me once. But after that night, it would never wound me again.